Yeah.
Okay. Moving on then, any declarations of interest, disposable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests in any agenda item? No. That brings us to public open session. I don't think we've got any members of the public in attendance, so I will move on to the minutes and recommendations of the meeting held on the 15th of June 2021. So I'll go through for accuracy first, and I'll start with page 4 of the pack, page 5, page 6, page 7, and page 8. Okay, so I'll propose those as a true and accurate record. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Knight. All in favour of approving the minutes? Okay, and so then move on to matters arising. So on page 4, page 5.
Yes, Chairman, I would like to.
That's the north.
Item 3, talking about the dates of the future meetings. Because I don't think this is going to work, but I think we're going to have to revisit this because there are several stages in the process of set the expenditure budget or an attempted draft expenditure budget on a sort of assumed precept, and then get later, sometime in January or February, we get the tax-based figure from central beds, and we then put that into a formal budget, which F&GP agree. It then goes to the council, which have to approve it and give the figure to central beds before a certain whatever the date is, so they can put it into their collection process.
Yeah. Mark, go first.
To how we can marry up the dates more efficiently, connect it to the budgeting process.
Well, thank you. Essentially, yes, Councillor North is correct in that the process and the cycle really demands, and I think that's not me personally, demands a meeting in the January period when we have that information from CBC. Also, the custom and practice in this council has been to go to the end of January council meeting with the formal precept setting, because that has to be done by council and not by committee. But all the work sort of leads up to that. As I understand it, my recollection is correct from the meeting that this was minuted, the last meeting of this committee. It was suggested that in order to comply with a 3-month cycle for each committee, that the meeting that was originally scheduled for January was for December. But I do think that I think it will cause some issues with the production of a budget, which will lead to a precept that can be set in January, and therefore I would suggest that we are moving towards the discussion of committee dates and council dates at the next meeting of council. And indeed, I understand that members would like to have an informal meeting next week. Perhaps this is something where I suggest that if you are willing, that it is brought up then and looked at. But the 7th of December, I will see it does cause difficulty.
So I think there were some problems with the original dates that were set as well, which is part of the, so there are 2 reasons why we looked to move them. One was 3-month cycle, one was some issues with the original dates. There are issues with these dates as well. We've got the meeting next week, and I think that's the time for us to reconsider all of the dates really going forward for not just F&GP, but we'll look at the other committees as well and full council for that.
Can I ask Corinne to do us an update as well? Because I think
scheduling, yes, indeed. I mean, we're aiming to definitely have something tangible in terms of meeting timetable, scheduler for the.
Excuse me, can we use this system, because I can barely hear what's being said?
It's not working for all of us. It might work for some on that side of the room, but not on that side of the room, and not here.
Thank you. So just for next, for the meeting where we're scheduling for next week, we will have a meeting timetable with a lot more content to it, so we can actually go through that and
decide on a way forward.
Okay, so any other matters arising on page 5? Page 6, Councillor Knight.
Thanks. Item C, the website update. Would it be possible to get a brief verbal update or maybe a short written note afterwards in terms of how the website is progressing with the various milestones and our progress towards them? Okay, thank you.
Any more on page 6? Page 7? And page 8? Okay. So items for consideration. First item 6A is the grants and sponsorship policy update. Mr. Toppin, were you going to introduce this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The policy has never really been adopted by this council. I did some research and saw that there was a draft policy in 2016, but as far as I am aware, it's still marked draft when I search the files. So there's never been a formal policy, although I understand that members have been using, if you like, a yardstick, which is practical and sensible. But what I need to do is start with a blank sheet of paper. And my proposals are based upon experience with other councils, partly what was drafted in this council, and partly what I consider, and you may disagree, of course, common sense. There are a number of points in the policy relating to the application process and also relating to the what I call the important dates, the cycle. It's not set in tablets of stone, but I am conscious of the fact that we are in the middle of a cycle this year, and that would sort of spill over to next year. And although the dates may be something that members would like to look at for the future, in my recommendation, I am suggesting that you do adopt that calendar of dates for the rest of this financial year and the following financial year 22-23. We can then begin to sort of evaluate and tweak, if necessary, for future financial cycles after that. But my main point in sort of drawing up this important date cycle was to give you the opportunity, should you so wish as councillors, to adopt a policy which looks at the grant applications twice a year rather than once a year, which means that somebody that perhaps just misses the deadline doesn't have to wait a whole year before they get a chance to have their application considered. But also perhaps to avoid the sort of piecemeal application process which has crept in, where if there's some budget left over, what happens then is that you are asked to as you are this evening, to look at some additional applications. If we had a date where that additional list could be grouped into one meeting, I think it would be more effective and efficient use of your time as well. So that's why I'm proposing that you adopt the grants policy for the interim period for next year, and then you can tweak the application process.
I think we had Councillor Storm first, then Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got several questions, if I may. Firstly, on the first page, which is page 17, do we normally advise unsuccessful applicants why they've not been awarded a grant? Or because I don't personally think it's wise. I think we should just say you've not been awarded a grant, and giving a reason, I think it leaves us open to challenge. So I'd like that out if that's possible. So, right, that's my first point, if I may. Secondly, important dates at the top of the next page. Applications to be considered on a twice yearly basis by the Finance and General Purposes Committee each January in accordance with the following calendar. As far as I'm aware, we only have one January each year, so that doesn't make sense to me. So I think that perhaps that needs a bit of a tweak. Moving on to the first cycle. I note you say grants are then awarded to the successful applicants. They've already been awarded when we've made that decision. They should be, that should, I think, be paid
And when you put it down as April, I think it should be in the next financial year, if that's the intention. So it's just quite clear whether it's before or after. Or where it is that the whole April is municipal year, isn't it? Sorry, I was thinking of the tax year. So that's, yeah, no, sorry. Then a second cycle, the deadline for receipt of applications is the 31st of August. I assume you're taking into account the fact that it's the holiday season, and in our normal cycle that we would be having a September finance meeting to consider that. And is that why we've got the 3 applications today? So you're working on that cycle already. Again, October should be paid, not awarded, in the time of applicants informed of outcomes, and grants are then paid to the successful applicants rather than awarded. So I think those points are some that we need to consider, but I'm just perhaps we should also have something saying that if an applicant puts in a late application, then it will just be held over to the next consideration date. So if someone puts in an application on the 1st of September, it's too late, but that doesn't mean they couldn't be considered for the January consideration.
Yeah. If you want to answer any specific points.
Answer the last couple of points first. Yeah, I accept perhaps paid is a better word than awarded. Thank you for that. The cycles are basically to give sort of payment dates in approximately 6-month intervals. So you've got April and October. The second cycle is shorter because it all happens within the financial year, whereas the first cycle sort of fits in with what was being discussed earlier in terms of the meeting schedule and the budget cycle. The consideration really is important from the point of view of having a reasonable period, and I do understand that August is a difficult time for many people to get applications in. But if we start on the 1st of June, we have basically 2 months, which is that's not as good as a 3-month period, September to December. But again, when you get to December, after about the second week, you've got Christmas. So I think at the end of the day, we're only probably looking at a couple of weeks difference in terms of the breadth of application. But I just think it sits neatly that we have you have a proposal from me to look at grants which would then be paid in April, and then 6 months later in October. It seems to be neat. It also fits in, as members may be aware, with the 2 instalments that we get from the CBC for the precept. So that's my view on that. And yes, I take the point that it shouldn't say each January. It should be twice yearly. I think you delete each January because the dates are in the cycle. I don't think you need each January at all. But rather than put words in, may I suggest you just delete those 2 words?
Okay, Councillor Knight.
Thanks. Thank you for your draft policy. So firstly, I'm surprised that the members of this committee don't really appear to have been invited to informally discuss the matters relating to this policy, or indeed brief you on what members' views of what the policy should be before a draft policy has been presented. I think it would have been more helpful to have an informal discussion before this document is presented. But anyway, I have a number of comments on it. The first point is I believe that grant applications should be published. Tonight we've received that information in a sealed envelope. I think if people are applying to receive public funds from the council, it's in the public interest and it's proper that we publish those applications. I'm comfortable that we withhold contact details, but I think that should be something that applicants expect, that their application will be published. Secondly, yes, I agree, the policy needs to make it clear what will be the treatment for out-of-sequence applications. I suggest that they are not considered except in exceptional circumstances, and maybe the chair of F&GP should consider which things should be presented to the agenda at an earlier stage. Alternatively, they should be carried forward. I think The 2 cycles should be within the financial year, not spanning the financial year, so we know what the budget is, and then we can make sure that the grants are awarded within that budget. And I also suggest that the total grants in the first cycle, if we're going to have 2 per year, should be capped at no more than 60% of that budget. I think perhaps the form that we use to collect information relating to the grants also needs to be revised, because I don't think that form currently collects the right information. And of course, it's important that we have the right information so we can make effective decisions. So in particular, I think applicants should be asked to tell us what the impact will be on them or their charities and organisations if we do not provide them with the grants. And I don't think that's something that we currently provide. I think the application form should be online, and I noticed some of the applications we have tonight are handwritten with a watermark that's obscuring them, and they're very difficult to read. So I don't think that's necessarily the best way for them to be presented, and maybe an online approach would work better. Those are my main comments. Thank you.
Councillor Russell?
I'm afraid I disagree with an awful lot of what Councillor Knight has just said. I know I keep harking back to the way we dealt with things in this council previously, but we had a decent system of doing it. And the way that we dealt with what became public in council was a form that was filled in from the application with the key details that we needed. And there are very few details that you really need to assess an application. I don't think we should be publishing publicly things like charities accounts. I certainly don't think that we should be asking the impact on a charity if the grant isn't awarded. I think that's confidential to them. And I don't think it's something that we should be considering when we look at these applications. So Councillor Knight went through an awful lot. This is the meeting where we should be discussing all this. It's possible that we do need to look again at the application form, in which case we could do that at the next meeting. We have always agreed grants before the beginning of the financial year, and they're paid at the beginning of the financial year, which helps a lot of charities anyway. I can't see why we need to change it, because it just foreshortens everything. And I think actually the basis of what Mr. Choppins put here is the right way forward. I'll leave it at that. I can't remember absolutely everything that Councillor Knight said, but no doubt we'll discuss further.
At one point, the Charities Commission actually publish accounts. They are a matter of public information.
In arrears, not necessarily within year.
Councillor North?
Well, I would just like to make 2 points. First, I agree with Councillor Russell about publishing. I mean, this sort of information that's in here, a lot of it is sort of handwritten and all the rest of it. I don't think we should be publishing that. I think the name of the organisation is probably all that's needed, and possibly the amount they're asking for. We should publish that, and we have in the past. Secondly, on one point that Councillor Knight made, which I think is important and ought to be in the policies, that the first cycle, whenever that comes, the first efforts with this year's budget, like Councillor Knight said, it should be no more than 60% cap on it. I would have suggested 50%, but 60% is okay. But it should be clearly stated, so you don't spend everything out. To make sure that people don't spend everything out the first time around. So I agree with Councillor Knight.
Any further comments? Councillor Bond?
The other comment about completing on a website, I think that's unacceptable. We have a lot of people, I'm not going to name them, who actually ask for money every year. We clearly are only able to actually write things down, actually do not use email, do not use these facilities, and have been, doing sterling service for Biggleswade for many years. We all know who we're talking about, and I don't want to disadvantage them at all. They were disadvantaged last time because clearly the grants were not advertised in the usual place in the Biggleswade Chronicle and missed out. And there was a lot of upset for that from people who work very hard and literally charge us pennies for what they actually achieve for Biggleswade.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Fage?
Assuming you're looking for a proposal. So I agree with a lot of what's in here. And we're adopting this for a year and a half, am I right? I think until the end of 2023. So opportunities to revisit things, but I'm glad we're looking at this now, because now is the time to look at it, because we know that grants are a really important thing that this council provide to our community, and we need to make sure our process is robust. So I propose that we adopt this document, perhaps with the suggestion that we change the name of first cycle and second cycle so that they all fall within the same financial year. That does seem logical. So the first cycle would be from June to August, and then we pay grants in October. Then the second cycle would be from September to December, and we'd pay grants in April. If that makes sense, I'd be happy to propose that. I don't think we need to constrain ourselves just yet with the 60% of budget. Let's see what this process looks like in practice with the two waves before we constrain ourselves that way. The only one thing I would like to add, and it doesn't necessarily have to be written down in the policy, but something for members and officers to consider, is where we advertise this needs to be consistent every single year, whether that's in the Chronicle, on the website, via social media, and being specific about what time that is going out, giving people plenty of opportunity to apply. I would just say as well that the website does need to be up to date to have any sort of application form, but as Councillor Bond says, there are other channels which might work better for others. So the subject to those, that one slightly major change, plus the gentler comments over where this is publicised, plus Councillor Strawn's wording about striking out each January and taking out the reasons for not awarding the grant. Subject to those two changes, plus the one I've just suggested, plus the gentle nudge over the website and where we publicise it, I'd like to propose this as written.
Can I just ask a question? Is Councillor Fade also intending to alter the word awarded to paid?
Yes.
Just for the sake of clarity, in which case I'm happy to second that proposal.
Okay. I will try and summarise what I think you have proposed, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So you're proposing to adopt the policy subject to the removal of the words unsuccessful applicants will be given the reason for not being awarded a grant, the removal of the words each January, and the replacement of the word awarded with the word paid next to the April and October lines. In addition, you are suggesting that the first cycle is the one that is labelled second cycle and vice versa going forward. And then you wanted something in there around where we advertise the grants. So it currently says by the council website and social media channels. So are you saying you want to add and local press or something like that?
No.
It's there. I just wanted to stress that needs to be consistent each year. That wasn't really part of the proposal. I'm happy with that wording if that's true and if that covers where we need to publicise it.
I don't think it does. Does it say anything about local press at the moment?
Yeah, so if you look next to June, so.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, but so should it say local press in the blurb in the second paragraph on the first page as well then, to clarify it? I think that's where I was thinking.
Yeah, make sure that that's consistent.
Okay. Have I missed anything?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to make it absolutely clear to members, I think, as well as making it clear to the press, our current policy, that I think officers should ensure that they write in whatever format channels appropriate to any and all past successful applicants. This is what we're doing, this is when we're doing it, this is the cycle. So just in case there isn't anybody who can start, then at least we've got consistent kind of, if there's any history associated with any body in the sense of any organisation, at least know what we're doing. So it just takes away that small chance that people won't know what's going on.
That's what I'm most concerned about. I don't think we've addressed the out of cycle applications. And I think we do need to have a policy on what we do. Otherwise, we are exactly where we were before, which is they come to council whenever people submit them because we don't have a policy to pull back on. So I think that's essential.
So if councillor Strawn is happy, perhaps one further sentence in there saying any out of cycle applications will be considered in the next cycle.
I'm going to suggest the words interim applications to be put forward to the next cycle.
Roughly the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so any application which falls outside the cycle just comes to the
Next one.
Windows 8. Yes, that's a sensible sentence. Apologies, I missed that. Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Okay. Any further comment from anyone? And we'll go to a vote then. All in favour? Any against? Carried. Thank you. That brings us on to the consideration of the grant applications. So the first one is the Biggleswade Sports Meeting. Councillor Page.
Before we consider these, how much money is left in the budget for grants in this financial year?
I'm pretty sure we can consider these, but then what's in the budget? It should be obstructive, but that seems to be.
It should be an obvious, essential piece of information. I'm surprised it's not available.
I'd be happy to give a view on the applications, but I think. we need to look at
Can't somebody have a quick look at the account? It'll be in the last set of accounts, wherever they are. If we can access them on the internet or something.
Perhaps we should, if it's possible to get the figures, perhaps it could just defer it to a little bit later on in the meeting so that we can get the figures and consider it.
Yeah.
If
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman? Rather than defer the whole thing, would members consider making a recommendation which can then be ratified by council in 2 weeks' time, which gives us time to
I think if one of the officers is able to get that information now, then I'll adjust the order of the agenda and move on to the items of information, and then we can come back to this item on the agenda later.
Alternatively, we could make a recommendation subject to there being sufficient budget.
Yes, at least that moves us on a bit.
That's no sensible.
Okay, we'll do that then. So, Biggleswade Sports Meeting. Councillor Page.
In the past, I proposed that unfortunately on this occasion, we can't give them money for this application. In my view.
Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Knight seconds that. Councillor Bond.
This is really the situation. This is the situation I referred to before, who actually they were unable to the efforts. But been long standing for a long time. There's never a significant amount of money. I think things haven't exactly worked particularly well since COVID and what's been going on. I think literally this is a one-off, and we should actually accept we should actually approve the grant. I feel very strongly about it.
Councillor Storm.
I would also support Councillor Bond's thoughts in that, because this application was actually received in June. I'm not sure whether it was the 2nd of June or the 20th something of June, but it was received in June, which was before the sports day. And in that respect, it's not a retrospective application. It was actually made and submitted and with this town council before that meeting. It might have been late for a variety of reasons. I think in that respect, it would be sensible to exercise our discretion. They do not take a massive amount from the town. They give a great deal to the town and have done over many years. And one gentleman in particular has done an incredible amount for the town over the years, which councils will probably know. And I think in that respect that we should support it. And again, the town clerk has already made a very good observation about making sure we communicate clearly with people about the application process. So I think this is the case, and we've got the pandemic. This is an exception that proves the rule to that. So if Councillor Bond was to propose an amendment to the original proposal, or
I don't think you can propose that as an amendment because it negates the proposal. So it was seconded by Councillor Knight.
in light of the information that this actually came to us in June. I missed that. Or we can just vote down.
The standing orders in terms of withdrawing, actually. But if that is the view of all members are voting against the proposal, I guess is the question, in which case we can move on to another proposal.
Well, I'll vote against my own proposal.
Okay, so do we have another proposal then? The bond.
I suggest we actually award the grant.
Well, how much are they asking for? 360.
Like 300 is what they're asking for, but then it says 360 as well, so it's not quite clear.
I see from the letter on the front that they are bringing together 3 different things that they usually ask for in grants, because they're talking about the Crab Lane embankment, which they've looked after for a number of years, which wouldn't get looked after otherwise. They've talked about training first aiders, which they do. First aiders well, they don't train, they pay for the training for first aiders for sports events, and the training is done by St John Ambulance. And then they're talking about their sports meeting. So since the figure that seems to be mentioned is 360, then I think that's the figure we should give them this year. And it will cover all 3 of those things, because normally we've given about £50 for the Crab Lane embankment and then small amounts for the other things. I can't remember off the top what figures. So I would like to suggest that it's the 360.
The first aid was always about £300. So it's, I mean, the figure up to about £400 is what I'd expect from this organisation. They're consistent in what they do. You know, there's a lot, we get a lot for that money.
Like the second Councillor Russell's proposal.
Okay, any further comment?
The only thing, Chairman, is that they might be mentioned that they need to review their constitution, because their definition of members and amateur athletics, I think, is slightly out of date now.
Okay, go to a vote then. All in favour? Any against? No, thank you. The next one then is the Trinity Methodist Church defibrillator project. Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So I generally am very supportive of getting more defibrillators installed around the community. And my understanding is this will be available to the general public should they have the misfortune of needing it. So I'm broadly supportive. I note it's quite expensive. So I would like to propose that we make a partial contribution to cover the cost of the defibrillator. And I'm going to suggest we pay for half of it. That's my proposal.
Okay, do you have a seconder for that proposal?
1971.6 for the total cost of the project, I think.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm not seconding, I wish to speak. Is it okay?
Yeah.
I disagree. I think we should give the cost of this. Trinity Methodist, both the church itself and the hall, as is said in this application, are used by so many community groups. They're also very close to St Andrew's School, and at an end of town that doesn't have any facility like this. And I think for that cost, we should just go with it and award it to them. Trinity do an awful lot for the community as well. So I would like to propose that we pay the 1971 60 pence for this proposal.
I'll second that proposal.
Okay. Councillor Strong.
I believe fully that we should have defibrillators, and I think we should be making sure they're clearly signposted, including our own ones. However, I do have reservations over this request for money and the full funding, simply because this organisation, according to the balance sheet we have, has got substantial funds, and they're a charitable organisation. And in that respect, I'm not sure that we should necessarily be funding any of it. I appreciate that it's good, and I think Councillor Knight may be more on the right track with a 50% donation, but they have got considerable funds of their own, much more than many other organisations, and hence I don't think it's right to fund the full. They want to do something for the benefit of the community, which I think is quite right. And I think if we can support them in that, that's one thing. But going to pay the 100% when they've got the funds they have, I think is wrong.
Councillor Bond.
Either I'm missing this balance sheet correctly. I don't think it's substantial sums. It's potential payments coming out. There doesn't seem to be substantial funds there at all. I know other organisations which have a lot more money who actually ask us for money every year.
I was going to say similar, but they may look as if they've got a lot of money there, but they've also got a lot of upkeep for what is a community facility, not only as a church, but as a community hall. And as I said previously, which is used by a lot of organisations in the town. And I suppose I should declare an interest because my husband's there at the moment for a call society practice. So I declare a non-pecuniary interest.
Further comment? Councillor Fage.
So we said we'd take this item on the agenda, perhaps with some caveats over what is left in the budget. I can't remember.
So the clerk does have an update on those figures.
Always in modern technology. Look, so the budget was just under 21,000. We have spent 42.5% of the budget, 8826, and we have 11,941 pounds left.
Quite a lot then.
So we've got more than enough for this and the last one.
So it's been proposed and seconded.
Yeah.
Can we get that?
Yes, Chairman. I was just about to. All those in favour of the full amount? Any against? No, it's unanimous. Thank you. And then that brings us on to the Bedfordshire Police Partnership. Comments from anyone? Councillor North.
Well, I'm not necessarily speaking in for or against it, but I think one of the criteria, which I believe is listed in the policies, that it is a local organisation of benefit to local people. And this is not a local organisation. That's all. Maybe we might still support it, I suppose.
Councillor Straw.
Well, I actually support this application because according to this scheme, it will benefit people within Biggleswade. And the Bobby scheme does do a lot of good, I do know, throughout the county in having that availability, security, etc., for vulnerable people. We've got the funds there, and it needs to be used in this area quite clearly. I think that should be the condition of the grant. But I know it does good for the people in Bedfordshire generally, and the fact that it's being run by the county police force in effect, I think we should be supporting it. Now I propose that move the £500.
Councillor Russell.
I'll second that because the Bobby scheme's been running for a lot of years and we have supported it as a council in the past. And it does do a lot to make vulnerable and particularly elderly people feel safer in their own homes.
Councillor Knight.
I was going to second it, but Councillor Russell beat me to it. I was also going to make the observation under 6C on the application form, there's a image of a PDF document that doesn't appear to have been circulated. So I don't think it's essential on this occasion, but looks like not all the information is being circulated.
Okay, so any further comments or move to a vote? If not, so all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So moving on to items of information, item 7A, finance review. So firstly, an all update on the action items from the finance review.
Okay. As members will recall, and I've discussed this with members before, it was not my intention to start the implementation of the recommendations of the finance review until we start. We're now pleased to say that one of our new appointees has kindly joined us tonight. I'm delighted to say hello.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
So just to remind you, we have two new starters. We have a finance manager and we also have a head of service, which joined us there. Both of our new colleagues are qualified accountants. One's a capital accountant, one's an accountant. There are to remind ourselves, and I've been reading the document earlier today, there are 40 plus significant recommendations that were agreed by members that will modernise the council. And I know from the conversation we had before how pleased members were with that particular review that we completed. But it is significant. I've actually already had conversations prior to the exercise in regard to saying basically this is the first priority when you come in the door. I've already shared the document that we appointed, and they will be looking to make progress on an implementation plan as soon as they start with the council. That implementation plan will understand the complexity of the recommendations that were made at the time. We'll look at the resource implications in regard to this. We will have a clear plan going back to council about how we move forward in regard to the recommendations. But what I would reiterate is there is significant room for improvement. This will make us a much more modern council. But some of our current practices, as much as they are acceptable, we are having to make some significant investment in regard to time. So please bear with us, and we'll come back with a schedule. All of this will not be completed within a 6-month timescale. It's very significant indeed.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the clerk on that? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is an all update on the revenue and income optimization work.
Okay, that's good news. Obviously, this is one of the key documents, again, that the council has been focused on doing over the last few months. Unusually, getting information when you can compare and contrast our council to similar type organisations is extremely difficult in our sector. The town council sector is one of the few sectors where actually these types of financial information is not shared quite broadly. There is not a central database of this type of information. There is for districts, counties, unitaries, boroughs, everything else is out there. So we took it upon ourselves to create our own audit family. So we've gone out to our local county, and then we've gone even further, and we have compared and contrasted all of our fees and charges with 30 plus other councils to date. We will hopefully go even further than that. We've looked at 6 so far of the 8 elements that we charge for in our council when we try and batch things together. So the work is about 70% through. What we're intending to do, having gathered all of that information, both a kind of localized audit family and a wider audit family, is firstly for a centralized group of senior officers to look and see how we compare. We've already done the maths associated with that. There isn't, strangely, a consistent message. We're not under, we're not over. Roughly speaking, when you look at all the indicators, around about 50% we're under and around about 50% we're over. It's my intention to bring a detailed report with all the maths associated with that to the next Finance and General Purposes Committee with a set of recommendations. Recommendations will look to implement any changes with member support from the 1st of April, the new financial year. What's also important to realise here is that this is not just about looking at what we currently charge and how we might compare to others. This is also looking at things that we don't charge for and seeing what other councils charge for. It's also looking at cost and cost plus about opportunities where we can try and, if we're going to give a gold service for something, then we can prove that gold service for somebody, and it's reasonable and members would want to support it, then this is what we're looking for in regards to bringing additional revenue through. So it's almost like, I'm trying not to be jargonistic, it's almost looking at our current operating model, and is there anything interesting out there in the sector that does things completely differently? Yep. Some of the other reports that I'll sit on the circumference of this, which we won't have a conversation about today, are, for instance, the next comment in regard to item B, which we'll do an update on in a moment. So one of the things that we'll draw into that are what does the Orchard Centre report look like, and how might that inform this conversation? So I think there's good progress, there's steady progress, and the report will come back in a similar format to what we had in regard to the finance review.
Thank you. Any questions before we move on? Councillor Russell?
It's probably best to leave it till the next meeting, but I would like this committee formally to write to NALC and tell them what we've had to do and suggest that that might be a service that they could give to local councils in the future, as the National Association of Local Councils, that is. You're looking at me. Seriously, I think, they should be providing that service for us. We pay a fee to them every year for their support, and I think we should write to them, but possibly when you've concluded your work, Mr. Tarrant.
It's a brief observation. I have, I'm very, very keen, as you know, to work with colleagues in town councils. And indeed, in the documentation that went out from our council to all of our local councils, we offered the opportunity of sharing this data more broadly, so all councils could take advantage of this. And I have to say I was quite disappointed with the response. A very small proportion came back. And in some cases, it wasn't actually sharing information. We're after having to be proactive and go out and search for it. So unfortunately, that wasn't easily forthcoming. And as Councillor Russell said, it's really very difficult to find an asset.
Councillor Strong?
Following on the Mayor's observations, perhaps we could contracharge NALC for some of the work that we're putting into it and start optimising our income from our excellent team of the Finance Department.
Thank you for your update. So I'm thinking about the revenue, and that sounds very good. I'm also thinking about the cost of providing some of these services, and I think it will be helpful, where it is possible, it may not always be possible, to understand the cost of provision when we're considering what we charge, because we have to, as a matter of policy, to decide, are we looking to make a profit providing a service or cover our costs, but we don't know what our costs are. Is that the sort of information you may be able to help us with?
Fine, because the answer is yes. So if you were to see the detailed spreadsheet, we haven't brought to this meeting, obviously. One of the challenges that I've made of all of our officers is this is not just about plus, it's about minus. So let's try and understand where we can be more efficient, where we can transform what we're currently doing in the sense that, yes, we might gain X by doing this, but if we can try and be more streamlined and be more efficient, let's understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to the next item, which is an all report from the Assistant Town Clerk on the scope and progress with the forthcoming Orchard Centre report. Mr. Shopton.
Thank you, Mr. This, isn't it? To get over there. Basically, the Orchard report, I'll start with the last bit, the progress. I think progress has been slow to start with, but it was sort of gathering information stage. I'm almost at the point of completing the report. I've got one or two tweaks to make and essentially put in some recommendations, which I'm working through at the moment. So what the Orchard basically covers is the past, present, future, and starting off with the sort of history and development of the Orchard Centre, the facilities that it provides at the moment, and then going through issues relating to staffing levels, charges, looking at some marketing, and I'll make a couple of comments on those points. On the staffing levels, I mean, this is very important part of the work that I'm doing.
I'm having problems hearing you.
2 or 3?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So it's just that it was feeding back a bit. I can hear it in my hearing aid, unfortunately. So yeah, so in terms of staffing, this also dovetails with the review that's being undertaken of the administrative staff, and information is being sort of fed both ways. So my report will help to inform, as I would hope that the overall review will help to inform me as well. That's a general point at this stage. I don't want to say anything more because I think when we're talking about staffing, it can be sensitive and a matter for an exempt item. In terms of charges, the town clerk has already mentioned the RIO, and I'm conscious, and again I've looked at the RIO, for the section. I think again it works two ways. It informs me, but it also hopefully what I will come out with will also inform the overall sort of decisions that will be taken later on within your review of the revenue and income streams. What I would say is that sometimes it's very difficult to actually find out where we are. I think we are in terms of the audit, again, about this sort of medium point, but it's very difficult sometimes because we are not always comparing like with like. When you're looking at what other councils charge for similar facilities, the structure of the charging system, whether they give concessions, for example, whether they charge for sort of ancillary facilities like use of the kitchen and so forth, it's not consistent across the whole of the sector. So what I'm going to try and do in my recommendation is to bring out what I think are some inconsistencies in our own charging policy. I'll just give you one example because I don't want to go into too much detail, but we do give certain concessions on the main hall at the Orchard Centre, which do not apply for the smaller training room. It leads to an anomaly where somebody can actually, if they are a regular hire the main hall at an hourly rate, which when discounted for their block booking actually costs less than hiring the small hall. So it's that sort of information which needs to come out and would ask members to consider a better structure. So that will come into my recommendations. I'll also have some recommendations concerning marketing. I have to say that without too much proactive marketing, the actual performance of the centre has been remarkable since COVID, because we didn't know whether we were going to get people back, but we had, and more, and new people as well.
Mr. Choppin, so
I think it might be important. I think that's a really helpful update, just to be absolutely clear. You're kind of 99% there, I think. When are we, can we just be clear to members, when we're going to be sharing that document with them, our intention?
It's my hope that I can write the recommendations within the next week or so, so that it can come forward whenever members would like to see it, whether it's at a council meeting or a future meeting beyond there. I'm basically guided by what members would like to see.
Councillor Alban.
I'm assuming that costs come into this as well. A previous occasion, we were looking at the energy contracts and the electricity costs, which seem to be investigations.
Short answer is no, I haven't actually looked into that because, as I understand it, the electricity contracts are being dealt with en bloc.
It wasn't anything to do with the project, the actual usage seems to be very high.
I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think that's an important point, but would it not be better just dealt with bilaterally outside? Because whatever I recommend in here is, I think it's an operational issue that we'd have to raise with the electricity supplier or through a broker. If I may suggest that.
Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So it sounds like this report is a sizable piece of work, so thank you for that. I think my point is slightly related to Councillor Alburn's point. I'm quite interested in understanding the scope of your report, and I may have some expectations around the scope of your report that are different to your expectations or other members' expectations. To avoid any possibility that our expectations are mismatched when the report is shared, could you perhaps share the skeleton of the table of contents or something in advance? So, for example, I'm thinking, are you meeting with tenants of the Orchard Centre and surveying their customer satisfaction? I don't know if that's in scope or out of scope. If you're able to share that sort of outline skeleton, it would be very helpful to help us understand that scope and offer any suggestions.
Yep.
I think that there are two. I think there are 2 points. One, I'm quite happy to share the table of contents. I can do that by email or SharePoint or both. What I think in terms of, sorry, can you remind what your second question was?
Tenants.
The tenants.
Yeah, for example, are you surveying the users and getting their satisfaction?
It wasn't my intention to do it as part of the paper exercise, but it would be one of my recommendations that, you know, we at some point run the report perhaps through some sort of focus group of users, and also maybe conduct some sort of survey, but it wasn't going to be part of my paper exercise. It was going to be, if you like, a recommendation as a consequence of members will accept that.
Mr. Tan.
Okay, I think one of the points that might have been lost in the update, which I'm very happy about, is today I read the review of the admin team for the first time, which obviously has a direct relationship to what Philip has been doing at the Orchard Centre as well. So I hope to be in a position to share the admin review very shortly. This is the same logic that we did in regard to public realm. We wanted to properly understand the nature and the volume of work that's coming to the team, how we can allocate that work, how we can be as efficient as we possibly can, and how we can potentially modernise and make better. So all of this kind of connects together. So I'm pleased that our deputy administration and HR managers now finished that with the help and support of all staff. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that Councillor Knight is actually creating a danger we'll have a camel rather than a horse out of this review, because we've got a senior officer preparing a report. I think that sharing a skeleton and then trying to discuss it and negotiate it is the wrong way. We employ the staff to do a job. We're there to look at it, review and amend if necessary, or criticise. We're not there to actually do their job for them. So I think it would personally, I think it'd be far better left to Mr. Truppin to produce a report. He's been doing it for a couple of years or more, I think, possibly. Would that be fair? Rather, yeah. But you've got the experience. Let the staff get on with it, and there's a support there now. We've got the admin team more or less up to speed. Can we leave it at that rather than having endless consultations? Otherwise, as I say, instead of having the horse that we're looking for, we'll end up with a camel.
Can I make just a general point, which actually may sort of satisfy both views? It may not. You please, say what you want, honestly. But my feeling is that this is not the end. This is, if you like, the beginning. And issues like, you know, having a customer survey and so forth will come out of it. And so basically, what you've got is a position statement and proposals for a way forward. But that is not a sort of static thing which, once agreed, it stays where it is. I'm hoping it's going to be dynamic and will actually evolve.
Okay.
Right. The last point, I guess. Okay. Again, I'm trying to stay away from jargon, but my advice to Philip, as he's framed this report, is this is a fantastic opportunity to start afresh and a blank page assessment of how we can modernise and fundamentally look at the operating model of the Orchard Centre and try and make it even more attractive to the community. So let's make no assumptions, and let's just think again about how we can do this in a much more creative and interesting way for the betterment of everybody. And I know, but I don't really want a report that kind of tags on what we currently do. Let's just have a complete rethink about how we can be more efficient and connected before we do that.
Councillor Alban.
I just wanted to raise my point about the action cost, which I may be right or wrong about, it's very hard.
But I think there's an additional efficiency savings report, as well as the revenue and income optimisation one, which I would hope is addressing our costs around electricity and other things.
Well, that report has not been started yet. It's not key one of the documents that we're ready to do yet, but we will do an efficiency and cost reduction review of everything we do. Yes.
Councillor Bond.
Councillor Arvin's probably alluded to is we were told about 2 or 3 years ago there were issues with the billing and the actual of the auditor centre and the way it was reflected in the accounts. That's what came up a long time ago.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but it was the last time we looked at.
I think I do know what you're referring to very well. So when we considered the energy costs not that long ago, it was self-evident that the costs associated with the audit centre seemed out of proportion and that it was worth looking at. Yeah, I think we should look at it.
Okay. Okay, so move on then to the asset register. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So as briefly as I can, I was reassured when I arrived I'd like to actually compliment colleagues who have worked quite well to create a pretty good asset register and put it in place already. My objectives going forward with this are to take the document from a static state as such, improve it further by providing some granularity in terms of things like on the ICT asset side, replacement life cycles for equipment that might be extremely old or very new, and just sort of getting into a better procurement cycle for those going forward, as well as valuation, adding in depreciation, which we're doing already on this register. And so that's on that side. On the much wider side of buildings and land plots that we and other tangibles that we have in the at BTC, we've done a good job of identifying those, adding in now. I'd love to take it from a case of getting asset values and maintenance costs ongoing for those items I've just mentioned, those classes, if you like, because there are two large actions going forward for me to kind of bring to bear. One is on engaging procuring the services of an expert surveyor to come in to, if you like, assess independently and partially those valuations that we've already got on the asset database and take it forward in terms of, sort of conditions of assets that we have, and then sort of work up a sort of a maintenance schedule as well for costings for those items going forward, so that when, as Mr. Tarrant has already said earlier, when our excellent new finance team arrive and in place, we can sort of build on that further and gain further momentum shortly. And the other big action I have going forward, I think, is to essentially put our arms around all of the land plots that we own already and do as a mini project, in fact, do a land registry search of everything in sort of greater Biggleswade area, and identify everything to make sure that we can nail down everything we know we have and other items that may emerge in the future. So that's those two things, big things that we can do hopefully as quickly as possible and as diligently as possible within the timeline to come forward for one of the next meetings to be scheduled.
I answer that, Chair. Is that all right? Yeah. So as Karim has highlighted, I think he and I have spoken about this at great length. One of the issues that Karim and others will be focusing upon, which is crucially important, is our maintenance of our capital assets, and to ensure that we're properly aware of the condition of those capital assets and what potential investment might be required to ensure that we keep them in good order. Yep. And that will be helped and informed by the support of a chartered surveyor and some degree of expert support associated with that. This should then be built into business as usual and should be a constant point of reference. And members are obviously been looking at asset register on a regular basis to see progress associated with that. But the importance here is that we do things in a cyclical way, and that there should be no surprises. So there's a constant update of information and a refresh, so that we can build organisational understanding, then supported by our capital account and our revenue accounting, and then build that into the financial life cycle.
Yeah. Councillor Russell.
Can I ask if the property that we've got on leasehold is going to be reviewed as well, so that we know exactly the terms of the lease when they're coming to an end and what our obligations about maintenance are within the lease, because I think that's equally important. And some of the decisions we have to make are whether how much we want to invest in what is somebody else's property. If we're not sure that those leases are going to be renewed in a couple of years' time, if it's as short a timescale as that. So I'm just asking that I can think of at least 2 leases, and there are probably more, and that should be something that we look at as well.
I can assure from there that we will be looking at that as well. And without going into detail at the moment, we have found some apparent inconsistencies with the land that we own compared to registered title of land registry. So we've already found some issues that we need to try and address.
Councillor Strong.
Just on the asset register, particularly on the leasehold side, do we have a diary of key dates with regard to rental changes, lease renewals, so that we've got the dates in there and they're flagged up in plenty of time so that we get the appropriate applications in for renewal without running out by mistake?
Yes. Running errands.
Councillor Salt.
Just to add that a few years ago, the council made a decision to make a huge investment in Rose Lane car park, even though we weren't sure at the time that the renewal would take place, which has just happened. But those are the kinds of political decisions that we need to make. We felt that the car park was so important to the town that it was worth making that investment, which was a 6-figure sum. So, which is why we need all this detail, because we may need to make other decisions in the best interest of the town, balanced against the best interest of the council.
Give you one example, Chair, another example of why this is such an important document. One of the things that we're working on with our public realm manager at the moment, who's obviously not with us today, is that we have I'm going to call it a fleet. It's a very, very small fleet, but it's still a fleet. We have a fleet of vehicles which have grown old. They're requiring service, and they're coming to the end of their time. As an organisation, we should know that they're coming to the end of their time, and we should build those monies into our financial life cycle again. So, we're, at the moment we're going through that and we're updating our fleet. Going forward, that will be built into our BAU.
Any final comments? In that case, move on to item number 8. It's another public open session. I don't think we've got any members of the public joined us. No one's snuck in behind me. No. And with no exempt items. So I will close the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Just to avoid making anything.
Actually, just reminds me, we haven't heard of anything about the splash park for good years or more.
Make sure that the recording is turned off.
I appreciate where you're coming from.
Are we still recording?